The first time that I met the drag queen who was going to host our drag show, I kind of ended up following her around the room. And after a little while, she looked at me and she leaned in and she said, not in a mean way, "What are you doing?" Well, when a 6-foot-tall drag queen in a wig and heels and a tight dress asks you that question, you better have a good answer.
From NCPR and the Adirondack Center for Writing, this is the Howl Podcast. I'm Ethan Shanty. I was playing at concerts before I ever actually went to one. We used to hold them in the basement of the Norfolk Hepburn Library. That didn't last very long because one night a shirtless brawl broke out on the front lawn. I forget what it was about. I'm sure it was something stupid. And one of those big cement benches got overturned. So after that, we had to find a new place that would let us play. And so the Norwood Municipal Hall became the hub for our little music scene. From 15 until 22, I was in that building 2 or 3 times a month, sometimes more. Punk bands from out of town would reach out to somebody through MySpace, the local troops would get rallied, and a show would happen. And I played in a lot of them. I was in a lot of bands. I was in The Fall Effect, The Bridges Out Ahead, What Makes Us Strong, Collisions in Gray and Red, The Shotgun Sniders, Eefy and Amy, and I don't know how many more. Plus, there were our friends in The Longest Day, Rhetoric of Disengagement, Red Star Rebellion, Antebellum, That's Unfortunate, Grapeshot Inferno, Goblin Grenade, The Holden Caulfield Syndrome, and on and on and on. When I was a teenager, there must have been at least 24 local bands who played here on a regular basis. And our shows were our lives. I'm not exaggerating that at all. It was what we did. It was what we lived for. That is how you met your girlfriend or your boyfriend. That's how you found out what music was cool, what movies people were watching, what books they were reading. The punk shows were our gathering place. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. If there was a show there were over 100 kids in that building. And honestly, it really did not matter who was playing. But by the time that I graduated college, shows kind of started to die away. There were fewer and fewer local bands to put on a bill. And at one time, when you might be able to guarantee a band would get paid like $150 for performing, and by then it was more likely that you'd be able to give them just $50 for gas, and they'd be lucky if they sold a few t-shirts. When the COVID-19 pandemic happened, it all stopped. And this huge part of my identity was gone, and I didn't know if it would ever come back the same way. Truthfully, the thing that scared me most, though, is that there was a younger generation of kids who might never get to have the community that I did. DIY punk shows are how I learned to be a part of a group and how to act with its best interests in mind. In an area like the North Country, where there are lots of towns with very few things that are open to teens, where would they find community? When things started to ease back up 2 years later or so, my friends and I decided it was time to give punk shows another shot, to try to bring it back to the North Country. But as for me, I had never booked a show on my own before. To say that I was scared about the whole thing would be an understatement. But I got to work finding a venue, organizing the bands, and advertising the show, and I did the math. If just 25 people showed up, I could break even and not have to pay anybody out of my own pocket. As the doors opened that day, I was a little deflated. Only a few of our friends actually showed up, and I thought, well, maybe there really isn't a hunger for live music anymore. So I was hanging my head, getting ready to go to the ATM to get cash to pay the band out of my own pocket, and then the door opened again, and a long line of unfamiliar faces streamed in. And then another 20 showed up, and then another 20, and then more. By the time we started, there were like 90 to 100 people packed into that building. Some I knew, but even more I didn't. These young kids with spiked hair and ripped t-shirts and outrageous makeup. And I remember thinking, where have all these kids been? Where were they the whole time our scene was dying? But it didn't matter where they were, because they showed up then. And our scene has been booming ever since. We've held dozens of shows in the last few years. And at the end of the summer, when we do our annual show in Ives Park in downtown Potsdam, hundreds of people show up. That's a far cry from right before the pandemic when we'd be lucky to get 15 or 20. And now there's more than a dozen bands playing regularly. It's pretty incredible to see. And although I get a lot of praise from people for making it happen, it makes me kind of uncomfortable. Like, I'm not the only person doing it. My friends are helping run the doors and hang flyers. SLC Arts Council is providing a safe space for kids. And most importantly, people are showing up and creating that community for themselves, just like I did when I was a kid. And now that I've put some thought into this story and how the whole thing happened, I'm thinking that a lot of community organizations start that way. You see that there's a need for something, but that no one else is really willing to do the work, so you roll up your sleeves and you just start. That's how it happened for Potsdam Pride Festival, and they've been helping to celebrate the queer community in Potsdam ever since. I invited its president, Rebecca Donnelly, into the studio to tell me all about it.
Dating is hard. Queer dating is harder. Queer dating in a rural area as a single parent, that is practically a moonshot. First, you have to create the perfect profile for a dating app, or maybe 4 or 5 different dating apps. Why limit yourself? You have to pick the perfect pictures, the ones that say, I'm cute and interesting, but I'm kind of tired, so I'm maybe not that interesting, so don't expect too much. But I think the hardest part, though, is this kind of acrobatic act that you do where you get your hopes up, but you're trying to stay tethered to reality. But on the other hand, it's love. It's potentially life-changing. Isn't this where we're supposed to go at it with our whole hearts, right? Well, thank God it turns out that there are other, much easier ways to change your life. For example, the first woman that I matched with on a dating app didn't want to date me, but she did inspire me to organize a community pride festival. We matched on the first day that I created my profile, and she was great. She was into hiking and romance novels, and she had this adorable dog. We met up. We took a walk through snowy woods, and we talked about hiking and romance novels and adorable dogs. And she didn't want to date me. Totally fine. We're good friends now, which is a very lesbian thing to say. But she said something else, something that really got the wheels turning in my head, and that was she wanted a queer hiking group, a safe way to get outdoors and meet people and have some fun. And I thought that was a fantastic idea. This was in January of 2022, so not that far out from the worst part of the pandemic. I was only just starting to venture out myself. My circle was good, but it was small. We met up again and went for another hike, and I kept thinking about this hiking group. And finally, I thought, well, maybe I could do that, or something like it. I'm used to organizing things. I worked for years in public libraries, and public libraries do a lot of community programs and outreach. I had actually left my library job in 2020 to write children's books full-time, and I was really missing that kind of casual interaction that you get from working in a public space. Now, what I wanted was queer community, but I didn't really know where to find it. So I started on social media. I started a Facebook group, and I invited a few friends to join, and they invited a few friends, and it was nice, but it never really led to anything. It didn't lead to a queer hiking group. So fast forward to June of 2022, and my kid and I meet up with my friend and her adorable dog at the first Pride Festival in Malone. It's about 45 minutes from where I live. It's a beautiful day. The weather's perfect. We're out in this field, chatting with vendors, watching kids get balloon animals, and people mistake us for a family, which is kind of hilarious. But the thing that I see is these kids, these teenagers, walking around with different queer identity flags, kind of wrapped around their shoulders like capes. There's the trans flag, the non-binary flag, the bisexual flag. And they looked so happy and so comfortable, just literally wearing their hearts on their shoulders. I had no idea how to express that part of myself when I was that age. I think I came out to one person when I was 14, and she wasn't even really a close friend. Maybe that's why I did it. It just felt safer. To me, in the 90s, queerness was like a secret between me and myself. I didn't even really understand it, so how was I going to talk about it to anybody, even if I'd felt comfortable? Writing, though, that was where I could explore all of those feelings that I couldn't explain. In stories or in poems, I could be a girl at boarding school with a crush on another girl. I didn't know that it was a trope back then. Or I could be a boy running away with his boyfriend on a train. I think my imagination was kind of stuck in the 19th century. But, no matter what generation you're growing up in, that sense of inner discovery and self-reflection, it is so powerful because there's no single experience of queerness. There's no one path. Everybody gets to have their own queer story. So in that field in Malone, I said to my friend, this is what we should do. If they can do a Pride Festival here, we can do it too. So I met up with a group of friends a couple weeks later, and we started talking about what it might look like. And this was the biggest thing that I'd ever been a part of organizing. So, we looked for some community organizations to partner with. As we started to talk about it, volunteers came out of the woodwork to help us with things like setting up a website or offering to run sound at the festival. And, this is where that experience of working in a library really came in handy for me. Because one of the principles about organizing that I'd learned was that to do anything in a community, you have to be in community. You have to talk to people. You have to listen and find out what's already been done and what needs to be done. Because even if you think you're doing something new, you're not really. You're building on years or decades of work that's been done and relationships that are already there. We weren't the first group to try to plan a festival in Potsdam, and we weren't even the first group to try to plan some events for the LGBTQ community. We were just the first group to try to plan a community pride festival. So our job was sort of to take all of these pre-existing things and just tie them together with a different focus. It's a little bit like world building, and hey, I'm a writer. I'm into world building. As I said, I have some experience with organizing things, but in terms of my personality, I don't know if I'm really a natural for this kind of work. Like, I'm a little bit anxious, I'm a little bit awkward. But when I get into something, I am into it, and I like to focus. Maybe a little bit too much. The first time that I met Amber Skye, the drag queen who was going to host our drag show for the festival, she was hosting a burlesque show, and I was trying to get her attention. I wanted to introduce myself, but I couldn't find a way to break in, so I kind of ended up following her around the room. And after a little while, she looked at me and she leaned in and she said, not in a mean way, "What are you doing?" Well, when a 6-foot-tall drag queen in a wig and heels and a tight dress asks you that question, you better have a good answer. I wish I had had something snappier to say in response, but I just shook off my embarrassment and introduced myself, and thank goodness we are friends now. There were a couple of other moments of gay panic on the way to organizing that first festival. We spent months trying to chase down a space to hold the drag show, and I ended up reaching out to someone that I had known in my library days, the director of the rec center in town. And he said yes almost immediately. It turned out we weren't even the first people to hold a drag show in that place. I mean, who knew? Hockey rink in winter, drag venue in summer. I think that is the moment when I really thought that this thing was going to happen. We'd spent a year doing social events, doing fundraisers, trying to get some money so that we could do this thing and put our names out there and bring people together. But, you can dream, you can plan, but unexpected things can happen, and you have to pivot fast. That might be one of the best things about organizing in a small town. You're only a few degrees of separation away from anyone else, so it's not that hard to get what you need. You just have to be willing to ask. June 9th of 2023 was the night of that drag show. You could not have wiped the smile off my face with a dozen makeup wipes. You could have wiped off the trashy little drag mustache that I was wearing, but the smile was permanent. In my welcome speech, I brought up that story about the first time that I met Amber. And I said, "Amber, do you remember when we met and I was following you around and you asked me what I was doing? Well, I think I have an answer for you. It's this." And I gestured to the audience. I said, "This is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get 260 people together in a small town hockey rink on a Friday night to watch a drag show to celebrate Pride." That was probably the second best moment of that weekend for me. The next day was Saturday, and after a couple of hours of scraping goose poop off the grass and chaotically trying to get vendors to where they were supposed to be, the music started up and the crowd poured in. And we couldn't believe it. We had done this. There were hundreds of people, friends and partners and families with kids, dogs. And there were teens with their identity flags wrapped around their shoulders like capes. And that was the best part for me. That was the best moment. Because knowing who you are and being able to be yourself and feel safe, it should be a completely ordinary thing. But sometimes it feels like a superpower.
That's it for this episode of the Howl Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. Make sure you come back next week. We'll hear a story from Sam Daring about learning to cook in prison.
So one time I'm in my suite and I'm starting to cook, starting to prep, and I hear this flickering like paper, like a flicker on my bars. And I look over and it's Old Timer's hand. He's flicking my bars with a note. So I grab the note and I open it up and it says, Youngblood, if you going out to the yard today, I would skip it. Them two gangs out there I heard was gonna pop off, and you don't need to be around that. Also, if you crunch up the spicy hot Cheetos and mix them with the water before you boil the rice, it'll color the rice and flavor it and make it taste like the streets.
The Howl Podcast is a co-production of NCPR and the Adirondack Center for Writing. The show is written, produced, and edited by me. I'm Ethan Shanty. David Summerstein is our script supervisor. Our theme music is by famous letter writer of Plattsburgh. Bill Hanel is our digital director. Caitlin Kelly handles social media, and Doyle Dean is our production manager. This show is made possible because of you. Support this show with a gift right now. Visit ncpr.org/give. And you can get even more stories with the Howl newsletter. It's brand new this season. We just launched it. Sign up and get stories that have never been featured on the podcast before. Sign up ncpr.org/subscribe. See you next week. For North Country Public Radio, I'm Ethan Shanty. This is NCPR.